Hey guys, I hope you're all doing well as always. In this video, we're going to talk about some pretty crazy stories from a guy's grandfather that was in the Vietnam War. And I think in a previous video, I covered something that's in these stories, which I'll talk about when it comes to it. But yeah, so as always, pull up a stump and let's jump into these stories. Thank you for watching. Before my grandfather died, I convinced him to tell me a bunch of different stories about his time as an American soldier in Vietnam. Quite a few of them are paranormal and very out of the ordinary, so I thought this would be a good place to share them. First of all, there's a little bit of context that's needed. My grandfather was drafted and sent to Nam as an infantryman or private or whatever he was. On top of this, my grandfather is really short. He's like 5'4", so he gets assigned to be a tunnel rat. They disarm explosives and booby traps above ground and fight through and destroy Viet Cong tunnels below ground. And it's probably the worst job you can have. Everybody hates it. This other half Hispanic guy is also short, and he's also in my grandfather's platoon, but he's not quite as short of him. His name is Daniel, and he's assigned as well to be a tunnel rat with my grandfather. Together they go on amazing subterranean adventures, as you can imagine. JK, some of the stuff they saw was, according to my grandfather, horrifying and completely mind-boggling. So, let's go into that. In this first one, he was sent out to clear and destroy the tunnels. He was equipped with this really terrible flashlight, a bayonet and some explosives, and an old revolver because the M1911 was apparently terrible for clearing out tunnels. So it's a basic mission. They've done this a few times by now. The tunnels are pretty small, even for a rat tunnel, and they're not finding any traps or Viet Cong, so they figure that the tunnels seem almost abandoned. But it's still whatever. They stay on guard for booby traps or armed people behind corners. They come to this larger section in the tunnels where they can stop crawling and almost go into like a crouched, kind of half-standing position. They can hear water running through the tunnel, so they start to think that they're either above a river or that the tunnel just leads into a watery cavern. Daniel shines his flashlight over to the other side of the room, and there are 4 completely massive spiders. My grandfather says that they were longer than a foot, and each one had a leg span of 2 to 2.5 feet. 3 of them were bunched up right next to each other, and one was resting about 3 feet away from the cluster. My grandfather hates spiders, so he sits there paralyzed. Both of them sit there quietly, just staring at them. This goes on for about 2 minutes. My grandfather takes his eyes off the cluster and looks toward the other one resting alone. It's not there. My grandfather looks around and sees the spider on his left, slowly but steadily advancing toward him. He screams and fires at the thing, but it doesn't even slow it down. So he hauls ass back up the tunnel with Daniel following close behind him. Daniel throws a grenade into the chamber as they were climbing back up to the tunnels. They make it out. They're both screaming and yelling about spiders, but nothing follows them out. They either died from their grenade or just stopped pursuing them. My grandfather told me after the story he's pretty sure that it wasn't even a Viet Cong tunnel that they climbed into, but a tunnel that was made by the spiders themselves. On another occasion, when they were crawling underground to destroy a Viet Cong tunnel, they were crouch walking through the tunnels and they find a not-so-hidden booby trap. It's one of those booby traps that would release a bunch of scorpions or snakes upon whoever tripped it. My grandfather and Daniel stopped to consider their options. They figured that they might be able to disarm it. How hard could it be? And pretty hard apparently, because this one was very complex for some reason. They're not really sure how to disarm the trap without releasing the poisonous death animals. So they decide to just blow it up. Hope the tunnel doesn't collapse on them. America. So they back up a good bit, and they lob a grenade over in the general direction, and they wait. Collateral damage. The trap is gone, so they continue forward. As they get to where the trap was, though, they notice another tunnel that's exposed by the grenade. Out of the new tunnel comes a 5-foot-long centipede, which barrels right past them and down deeper into the tunnels, and they think, screw this. They're not wanting another incident like with the spiders, so they plant their charges and they, again, haul ass out of the tunnel. They make it out of the tunnels, shaken but no worse for wear. And this one doesn't really involve my grandfather directly, but it's about some of the stories that he heard from the other guys while over there. At the beginning of the war, my grandfather was talking to a bunch of guys from a different company, and they tell him about how they saw a bunch of wild apes in the jungles. And he's thinking, yeah, okay man, there's no apes in Vietnam. As the war goes on, more and more guys claim to have seen these apes, and he's thinking maybe could be something to this. They call them rock apes, and as they threw rocks at the soldiers they encountered, apparently they were coated in red hair and were normally about 5 feet tall. My grandfather still isn't 100% convinced. He thinks that they're either making it up or they could be mistaking it for something else. But when he says this, a bunch of the guys get really defensive. They say that they were awoken in the middle of the night by screams and hollers while being pelted by rocks. When they went out to investigate, they were ambushed by these things. Apparently the apes were extremely strong and managed to kill 2 soldiers. They still managed to fend off the bunch of them though. My grandfather still didn't 100% believe the guy, which was odd because he saw a lot of weird stuff too. Grandfather says that he also heard stories about giant snakes in the jungle as well. And in a different video I had talked about the rock apes. I think it was in one of my videos where I did one about Bigfoot and stuff, where I kind of classify them together. So if you want to see more stories on rock apes, I have another one on the channel somewhere, so I couldn't tell you which one it is right now, you know. But yeah, back into the stories here. About halfway through the war, there was orders to clear out some tunnels, so my grandfather and Daniel start crawling through. They start to faintly hear voices. They think it's either running water or it's, Viet Congs. They keep working their way through the tunnels and the voices get louder, and they think, oh shit, this isn't water. They realize they are probably really close to a room full of Viet Cong, so they decide to ambush them and then blow up the tunnels. They pull out their revolvers and rush further down into the caves and fall into this huge, spacious room, and there's large white eyes all around them, and they think, wow, this is a lot of people. Raising his flashlight, he notices that they are not Viet Cong at all. According to my grandfather, they were 3 to 4 feet tall, very lanky, white, and had big eyes and ears. They were each wearing a bunch of different clothes, some obviously looted from corpses, others were basically just wearing rags. They make a hissing sound at him and Daniel and start running deeper into the tunnels. My grandfather and Daniel are kind of awestruck and don't really know what to do. Daniel keeps going on about Latin American folklore involving gnomes and stuff. They eventually just climb out and report the tunnels as being abandoned. So this next one doesn't so much involve tunnels, but it involves like a body of water. So it's his day off and my grandfather and others are resting. A few of the other soldiers go down by a nearby river to cool off. About 30 minutes later, one soldier comes back and he's screaming about how something in the river attacked one of them. They all grab their rifles and a first aid kit and run down to the river. 3 soldiers are on the bank of the river and one is bleeding profusely and the other 2 are trying to administer basic first aid. My grandfather says that something tore his leg completely off. They look into the river, which is now red from blood. They see this giant eel-like creature swimming around. It's yellowish and has long fins on its side. They said it looked like a massive moray eel with fins, and they think, what the F is this thing? They fire on it. It darts further down the river. They try to get the guy back to camp to do better first aid, but he dies on the way of blood loss. One time, my grandfather and Daniel are about to dive into some more tunnels. As they're about to go in, they hear a deafening roar come from the tunnel. They said it sounded almost like a dragon. They are all stunned. They look at a nearby officer who just kind of shrugs and tells them to go in anyways, and they're like, oh, gee, thanks. This tunnel is apparently worse than most. It's filled with giant spiders, there's spiders everywhere, and giant ants and everything else. In spite of that, my grandfather continues to crawl through The roaring gets more frequent and farther they crawl down the tunnel. And they're thinking, like, they really don't want to die today, so screw this. They plant the charges right then and there and haul ass out of the tunnel. As they're crawling back up, the tunnel starts shaking like mad. They hurry up and get back to the surface, thinking everything there is shaking too. They detonate the charges, destroying most of the tunnel. Roaring and shaking proceeds to stop. And this is the last one I have. Even I have a hard time believing this one at times, but the way my grandfather told it, and he was so sincere. He was crying and sobbing during it, and absolutely racked with grief. But this was near the end of the war, and they're once again clearing out tunnels. So there's no creepy crawlies thus far. So they're crawling through and realize that this tunnel leads up to a cave of some sort. They explore the cave for a bit, and they're about to head back up when they realize that there is a light coming from one of the passages in the cave, and it's not either of their lights, so they're like, oh great. They grasp their revolvers and walk through the passage. My grandfather says that they walked into a well-lit room filled with brightly colored plant life that they didn't recognize. The light was coming from an orb in the ceiling of the cave. There's vividly colored birds flying around everywhere. What the actual hell is this place? Him and Daniel explore a little. Among other things, he finds spiky red fruit the size of a watermelon and bright yellow pool of water. My grandfather says it looked like he was in a fever dream almost. They head towards the back of the room and they find some kind of stone altar. Blood is stained across the stone, and there's a couple of knives and other tools lying about the stone. Their curiosity turns to dread. They turn around to get out of there. They stop. There are 5 of these reptilian-looking humanoids staring at them. Says that they were about 5.5 feet tall, blackish green skin, and it was kind of scaly. They appear to be wearing robes of some sort. Without hesitating, my grandfather and Daniel fire upon them. One goes down, another shrieks out in pain. The room gets extraordinarily bright. My grandfather passes out. My grandfather wakes up, back in the main part of the cave. The passage him and Daniel went down is now gone. Daniel is also lying next to him, but he's barely breathing. My grandfather can only do so much for him down there, so he drags him up out of the cave and back through the tunnels. He gets back out and hauls Daniel up through the tunnel. They grab him and send him off to get medical attention. After pulling Daniel out of the cave, my grandfather remembers about what he saw in the cave. He says that his vision once again goes black and he can't remember the next 2 days. According to the other guys in his platoon, he was in a state of shock. He apparently could barely speak, shuddered a lot, and stuttered when talking, almost like he was shell-shocked. He was sent to get medical attention as well. 2 days later, he is mostly okay, but he still shudders. He goes back and asks his platoon about Daniel. They say that Daniel died after being pulled out of the tunnels. My grandfather breaks down immediately. Apparently, the war was close to ending after that. He only delved into 2 more tunnels after that experience. He legitimately hated anything subterranean after that. He despised caving, insects, and lizards of all kinds. He even requested to be cremated so that he wouldn't be buried underground. I showed him a picture of just a generic drawing of an alien, a reptilian alien, and he just had a heart attack. He said that if the skin was like a little bit blacker, but besides that it was pretty close. So what do you think about that? I thought it was pretty crazy myself. Do you think that Daniel died, or do you think that kind of men in black people just kind of took him? It's really hard to say, but what do you think about the story? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, and thank you for watching the video. If you want to support the channel, then you can do so at the links in the description. I have a Patreon, and I have a PayPal that you can make a one-time donation to. And once again, thank you for watching. Have a good night or day, or whenever you're watching this.